alive versus the undead. Any Halloween jokes are welcome, by the way. So, all right, we are now live streaming. So I will call to order the Finance Committee. Oh, I knew that. The Finance Committee meeting of the Park District of Highland Park is called to order on Thursday, October 21, 2021 at 4:03 p.m. Pursuant to Section 7E of the Open Meetings Act, the President of the Park Board of Commissioners has made a finding that it is not practical or prudent to hold in-person meetings because of the COVID-19 public health emergency. Neither the elected officials nor the public will be allowed to attend regular or committee meetings in person, but will participate virtually by means described below. So with that, Roxanne, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Bernstein,
Here.
Commissioner Freeman.
Here.
Commissioner Kaplan, Vice President Grossberg,
Here.
President Ruttenberg.
I am here, and we certainly have a quorum. Executive Director Romes, are there any additions to the agenda?
None from staff, no.
Okay. Is there anyone from the public attending virtually or for this meeting?
Nope, nobody attending for public comment.
All right. So the next order, we move down to approval of the Finance Committee meeting minutes from September 22, 2021 and October 6, 2021. Is there a motion to approve the Finance Committee meeting minutes as so noted?
So moved.
Is there a second, Terry?
Well, I'm not sure I was there, but I read it. It seems good to me. So I second it.
I will second it just to make sure the record is clean. All right, all in favor?
Yes.
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 Motion is carried. We'll now move to the 2022 Tax Levy Presentation. Director Peters to present.
Hey. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me get this in presentation mode. Okay. So we have for you what we are proposing for the tax levy for 2021. First, we're going to go over our timeline. And we can see here today we have October 21st, which is our Finance Committee meeting. And today we're going to be discussing our tax levy presentation, which we're doing right now, and that will culminate at the end with the Truth in Taxation resolution that we'll be asking you to pass at the November 16th board meeting. Now, you will see in a few minutes that our Truth in Taxation amount this year is greater than 5%. And when it's greater than 5%, that causes us to have a public hearing on the Truth in Taxation amount. And the reason that that is over 5% this year, if you recall, last year we had a 0% Truth in Taxation amount that the commissioners worked very hard to get to. And we'll go over that and kind of do a refresher on that in a few minutes. But that is really what is driving the greater than 5% increase this year. And so with the Truth in Taxation public hearing, that will be put in the paper sometime between December 1st and December 7th, depending on when the paper gets published. And then at the December 14th board meeting, we will have that public hearing. And then after that, we will pass the tax levy ordinance, and then it gets filed with Lake County by Tuesday, December 28th, which is the last Tuesday in December. Now we're going to review. You may remember the slide from last year, except for Commissioner Freeman, but we'll introduce you to this. Basically, we strive to have between a 45 and 55% break between our revenue from operations and our revenue from taxes. And we can see here in 2020, really the year of the biggest grip of the pandemic with such extended closures and reductions in offerings. Tax revenues last year carried us by making up 66% of the income coming into the district, whereas operations fell to 34% last year. So a pretty unbalanced sources of income for us. However, In 2021, we have rebounded nicely, and based on projections that staff are working on right now in conjunction with the 2022 budget, we are projecting that by end year, our tax revenues will be at 55% of our income, whereas operations will be at 44% of our income. And these numbers are very comparable with where we were at in our pre-COVID year in 2019. They were at 47% and 53%. So we are really making a great comeback. So let's go over our tax levy refresher so that we're all refreshed and on the same page with our taxes. So the purpose of our tax levy is to appropriate necessary funds to support mission critical community assets and services. And one of those components would be capital repair and replacement. When you look at our annual report on the balance sheet, you can see that we have $54 million of capital assets around the district. And those are constantly needing some sort of repair. And as they get older, they need to be replaced. And those are the items that we have designated as tier 1 through 3 items. And so we have tier 1 through 3 capital projects in our 5-year capital plan. And that amount sits at about $39 million right now. We also have capital improvements, and those are really our tier 4 through 6 capital projects. And again, based on what Director Smith and myself have previously shown you, we have about $21 million sitting in the unfunded tier 6. And we're going to touch on these figures a little bit later in a different presentation, but we're just refreshing you on what happens with money, with any surplus money that we have left over at the end of the year that we transfer into the capital account. Then we have operational maintenance that we need to maintain because we have 45 parks, we have 4 lakefront properties, nearly 800 acres of open space, and 11 facilities, all of which too are vying for the dollars of the park district to be maintained. When we look at our tax levy considerations, we want to make sure that we increase the levy by the CPI each year, which is the Consumer Price Index. You could really think of it as an inflation number at the end of the year. It allows us to keep increasing taxes to keep up with inflation. And then we also get to levy based on new growth in the district. So for example, we know that Albion built those 2 new towers this year, and they came in at a little bit over $6 million as far as EAB. We want to make sure that those are in our new growth number. So again, we want to increase the levy by the CPI and new growth so that we will avoid any negative impact on future levies and long-term funding for capital repair, replacement, improvements, and operational maintenance. If we have uncollected tax revenue, we won't be able to recapture that lost revenue in future years. Also, if we have uncollected tax revenue, it will limit our ability to keep up with inflation. Again, that CPI factor, which is at 1.4% for this year. Also, by not collecting tax revenue, it reduces necessary revenue without really an alternative source to replace it, which will have a compounding negative impact on the district's ability to maintain community infrastructure, resources, services, and amenities. Also, by having uncollected tax revenue, it decreases our district fund reserves, which could have a negative effect on our district's AAA bond rating, thus costing the district more to borrow money and not being good stewards of community assets. Now we're going to look at our key tax levy factors that we need to consider when preparing the levy. So for the recreation and general funds, which are tax cap funds, we look to the CPI. Current law restricts park districts to limit increasing their levy by CPI or 5%, whichever is lower. The CPI factor is automatically adjusted through economic conditions. And like I just said in the last slide, CPI for 2021 is going to be 1.4%. We also want to make sure that we pull in all the new growth that we're aware of, and that accounts for new property, and it cannot be accessed in future years if we miss on it now. So that's another number. It's things like new buildings, like we've discussed Albion, any new housing that goes up, if there are room additions or tear downs, those all fall into your new growth number. It's important that we try to capture everything and what we can use sort of as an example. If you're casting your net out there to bring in all the property taxes, we want to cast it as wide and far as we can to make sure we don't miss anything. We don't want to leave any tax money behind on the table. And if we ask for too much from the county, they will come back and say, no, you've asked too much and this is all you can get. And that's fine. We wouldn't want it to be the other way around, that we don't ask for enough and then we've left money out there that we couldn't bring into the district. And so we received a statement from Lake County on September 9th, and they are estimating that we would have $22 million of new growth at the end of the year. We went back and further researched how accurate Lake County has been with giving us this number for the past few years. And some years they're low, some years they're high. So again, in keeping with this thinking of casting our net far and wide, we're going to use a $25 million number for new growth just to make sure that we don't miss anything. And again, we have made sure that that $6 million of Albion is included in there. We also look at the EAV, which is the Equalized Assessed Valuation. Again, on September 9th, Lake County gave us an estimate of about 0.7% as being the increase for the EAVs here in the district. The past few years, we have had declining EAVs with this 0.7%. So this is a positive direction here. However, when we go back and look at what we were told EAVs were going to come in at previously and where they did, sometimes they were a little low. And so we're going to recommend that we use a 2% EAV for our tax levy. So those are really the things to consider for your tax cap funds. And then we want to talk about the special recreation fund. It's levied differently. It is purely a percent of EAV, and it's anywhere from 0 to 0.4%. If you remember last year, this is what we utilized to give our taxpayers a 0% increase. We had a truth in taxation of 0% last year because we cut this roughly in half when we levied the taxes last year. If you remember, we were afforded that opportunity because we had sitting in the special recreation fund over $300,000, which was going to be used for payment for the new building, the new NSSRA building, and that payment got postponed from 2020 to 2021. So we were already sitting on this money that we just carried over to the next year for that payment, and that allowed us to reduce our tax levy in regard to the special recreation fund in order to make our truth in taxation 0 last year. So what all those factors do for us is gets us to our truth in taxation number. When we compute these, we utilize some spreadsheets prepared by PMA, and they have training for park districts, I think across the state actually. And then after we test those out, we usually run them past Bob. We did this here just to make sure he agrees with our thinking too, being an expert in this area. So what we came up with for the tax cap general fund, we have our extension from last year was $5.7 million. And this year we're going to have a tax levy of $5.8 million, which is an increase of about $140,000 or a 2.47% increase. On the next tax capped fund, we're going to look at the recreation fund, which is about $5.4 million. We are going to levy $5.5 million, which would increase that by $133,000, or again, 2.47%. Now we have special recreation. Remember, this is not tax capped, it's computed completely differently. We can see that when we had our truth in taxation of 0 last year and did not levy the full amount in special recreation, that our extension came in at under $600,000. This year we are recommending a full levy, which would be about $990,000. And so you see that fund, the increase would be about $400,000 or 6.78%. So when we look at this all in total, we can see that our extension was at $11.7 million. We are going to levy $12.3 million, which is about $670,000 of an increase, which gets us to the truth in taxation amount of 5.76%. And We're going to show you what the truth and taxation resolution will be looking like in November when we bring it to you. It has that extension amount we just showed. It has our tax levy amount. It shows the 1.4% CPI, and it shows our truth and taxation of 5.76%. And we will look to be passing this on November 16th at the board meeting. And then again, once we pass this with this truth and taxation amount at the 5.76, we will need to post a hearing and have a public hearing about this at the December board meeting before we would go ahead and pass the ordinance. And so now I'm going to pause and ask if anyone has any questions.
Why don't we start with Jen?
The only question I have is how does that translate to for taxpayer per household?
So we go with a median household in our district of about $615,000. And when we apply that increase, it's about $66 per year. So it'd be about $33 for each of the two tax bills, considering that person's, EAV and such are staying the same.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Terry?
Well, I know I don't have any questions about the math or about the presentation. I was just wondering, I'm interested in hearing how the rest of the board feels about this. I had a short but good conversation with Brian Romes about this earlier, and I'm always, cautious, especially when we're getting to larger percentages and things like that. So I'm interested in the conversation about this as we go through it.
Do you want to express an opinion on the percentage at this point?
Well, I understand it. I actually kind of want to see, I don't know how much more, Roxanne, Mary Lynn, we're gonna get going down into the details of this. I felt better about it when Brian explained to me that we have staffing needs that need to be paid for, plus any of this replace stuff that we have to do for repair and replace is now coming in much more expensively than it was, say, 2 years ago. That speaks to me in a very plain and understandable way, because every cent that we spend more, I feel like I need to have a good explanation for it for the people that come to me to explain these things for them. Why did my 6% of the tax bill go up X percent? And I want to have a good reason as to why that happened. I don't want the reason just that we should send out a wide net and grab what we can. That's not good enough for me. We don't have to grab everything we can whenever we can. But if you give me the reasons behind it, then that's what I can go to a constituent with that. So give me that.
Okay. So Executive Director Romes absolutely gave you, it sounds like quite a few reasons. We have a $26 million reason, I would say, in that we have many unfunded tier 6 projects that we really don't have funding for right now. Over time, possibly as we issue more debt, and we're going to look at the 5-year funding model in a few minutes. But that is, I would say, another huge reason too, as to why you want to try to keep those funds coming in so that we are able to not only maintain what we have, replace what we have, but possibly considering making some of the other improvements that are on our unfunded item list.
Can I jump in? And Marilyn, I don't want you to think at all that I'm attacking you or the way you're putting this together. That is not it. I just always have to have a reason or an explanation for people. So I'm just going to tell you the difference between a couple of the things I've heard that I readily accept and can really grab onto, and the argument that we have unfunded things that are down the road sort of thing. Well, we those are dreams right now. And if we didn't have the money, we wouldn't do that. I don't know that necessarily we want to grab money in case we want to do that. Again, this is just my feelings. I like the stuff where, yes, expenses are going up, or yes, we are overworking our employees and we need to hire more people, or we are underpaying our employees. I'm not saying that that's what's happening and we need to pay them more, or whatever sort of thing that is happening in our district. I want to be able to rationalize it on things that are happening, not on things necessarily that could happen 5 to 10 years from now. That's just me.
Understood.
Thank you. Cal? Give Cal a minute to see if he can come back on.
Thanks, Barney. I'm a little tied up here at work.
We understand.
I'll just have to punt on this one, sorry.
Okay. And I understand I'll proceed then. I understand the logic and the need for the funding. And we have to prepare for the financial health of the district, not just in 2022, but in the years to come. And I think at this, we gave a tax. We took into consideration COVID last year to the best of our ability, knowing that this is money that's going to be collected in 2022, when, you know, we all hope that the economy is going to be back, the jobs will be back, and we'll be past the COVID situation. I think this is an appropriate way to proceed. If there's no other questions, we'll turn it back to Marilyn.
Okay, all right. Then I would request that we move to the next item on the agenda, if that is okay with you.
Would that be the supplemental property tax levy?
Yes, it would.
Well, why don't we move to the supplemental property tax levy, Bob Lewis?
Okay, very good. I'm actually going to start us off and then I'm going to transition over to Bob. So let's just, again, we'll just very briefly sort of have a small education on the tax levy for the the debt service fund. So the tax levy purpose, it appropriates necessary funds to general obligation bonds. The tax levy amount is determined by principal and interest in the debt service payment schedule at the time the bond is sold. And the supplemental tax levy that we're talking about increases the amount of taxes levied to pay the bonds up to the amount of the principal of and interest due on the bonds payable from the taxes levied for such levy year. The district has the authority, in accordance with the provisions of the Park Code, the Debt Service Reform Act, and the Tax Extension Limitation Law, to adopt a supplemental levy causing the amount of taxes levied to pay the principal of and interest on the bonds to be increased up to the amount of the 2021 base, or the amount of the principal of and interest due on the bonds payable from the taxes levied for each such levy year, whichever is less. And what we're going to do now, because that was kind of a mouthful, is explain it. We have a couple of charts, I think, that will help explain it better. And I'm going to let Bob Lewis from PMA go through that. Also, last time, I think someone had said, you know, you should give us the questions we should be asking. So we do have some questions built into this too that you may be thinking. And we're going to have Bob walk you through those as well. So we're going to go to our next slide here. And we have a question. And Bob, I guess I'll let you take it away from here, if that's okay with you.
Yep, that's fine. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so in the last slide, when the word base was used, what it's referring to is the debt service extension base, or DSEB, which I think you're familiar with that from the bonds that we did in 2020. And I think I've mentioned in the past that the DSEB is tied to, if you go ahead and advance to the next slide,
Okay.
the DSEB is tied to CPI. So it's a little bit like the operating side where your constraint goes up by CPI every year. But unlike the operating levy, where each fall you file a new levy and you can increase it by CPI, just like Mary Lynn just went through, the debt cap, the DSEB, you can't just increase the levy without having an actual bond payment in place. Okay, but when the bonds are sold, we don't know what the future CPIs are going to be. So the levies that are established when the bonds are sold cannot exceed the then known DSEB. And so that's what's on file at the county right now. But in the plan of finance, we incorporated an assumption that the DSEB would increase by 1.5% per year, an estimate for CPI, until you got to the point you were going to do the next financing. And so in order to, well, I think I'll pause it for a moment to probably explain another question that's not in the slide. You may be wondering, well, we haven't done this on, on our prior financings. Well, this became available back in 2009. And for several years, the district did not do a non-referendum borrowing. So there was no way to avail ourselves of this law because there just was no debt, non-referendum debt for a period of time. And then when you did start doing non-referendum debt again, we didn't go right up to the DSEB in the first year. We stair-stepped it upwards to get to the restraint, so it wasn't as large of an increase in 1 year. So this is really the first financing where this comes into play for the district to take advantage of the additional growth in the DSEB. So Mary Lynn, why don't you go ahead and advance the next slide. So right here, this is taken from the actual ordinance that was written by Chapman and Cutler, the debt service on the bonds. Now, this is just the bonds we sold in 2020, because this is the series that assumed the growth, and this series is structured around the prior bonds that were already outstanding. So the debt service is in column A. The levies on file are in column B. Those fit with the then known debt service extension base. And then this year's CPI, as Mary Lynn already mentioned, is 1.4%. So it's right there, right around what we assumed. If CPI had been 4%, we couldn't increase the levy more than the bond payment, because unlike the operating side where you can increase all the way up to the CPI, you can't actually levy for bonds unless the bonds exist in that amount for the levy. So the supplemental levy then that you see of $19,000 in the current levy year, and then additional taxes are available as well in 22 and 23, but those won't be levied and extended until those years, are now available because of the growth in the debt service extension base. So the levies on file will be revised to what you see in column D. Now, this slide just has a bunch of numbers, which I think are important to see the illustration, but I think the next slide with the graph will hopefully help complete the picture, if you will, no pun intended. And the orange line was the then known DSEB when we sold the bonds in 2020. And this was always part of the plan of finance. The issue that happens the first time this is done is we know the CPI, the next year's CPI, so there's not an adjustment that needs to be made. So it's oftentimes we're not coming back to boards until 18 to 24 months later when we now have a new CPI that we got to take action for. So the red line represents what the DSEB now is, the limit, if you will, based off the 1.4% growth. So the supplemental taxes you saw on the prior slide is the little area between the orange line and the red line in each of those 3 years. Now, in the fourth year, the payment declined because that's when we're anticipating doing the next series of non-referendum bonds. And the dashed line, what does that represent? Well, that represents if CPI averages 1.5% over the next 20 years, that's what your DSEB will grow at over time. And, the General Assembly rate or provided the tying to the CPI to make it consistent with what you see on the operating side, because, over time, capital needs increase. So the thought was the DSEB should increase to help provide additional funding for capital projects. The advantage of having done this is the little bit of blue that's above the orange line in each of those 3 years. That's principal that we're able to amortize in those years, that if it weren't in those years, we would have to have amortized that somewhere between 24 to 32. which means we're essentially creating more borrowing capacity for the next financing. And that the next benefit, if you will, is if we had kept the payments at the orange line, and then you got to levy year 24, and we went up to the then known DSUB at that time, represented the dashed line, that would have been a larger percentage increase in 1 year. So by having the incremental CPI growth each year, we're able to make the increase in 24, incrementally not as large if it would be if it were coming from an amount that was at the orange line in 23. And one question you may have is, okay, well, you've heard that CPI is running hot this year. It's running 5%, give or take. What does that mean for levy year 22? Because that dash line would then be higher in levy year 22, because instead of 1.5%, it'd be 5%. Well, there's no bond payment that would take you up to a 5% line. So you still would only be able to capture 1.5% growth in the bond payment in 22, because the CPI can only, again, be captured to the extent that a bond payment exists. So that's where it differs a bit from the operating side, because the operating side next year, you guys are going to have the choice. Okay, CPI is 5%. What do we want to do about that? That won't exist on the debt side. You'll be stuck at just doing 1.5%. So while Mary Lynn just went over what you are doing on the operating side, and that's a 5.6 or whatever percent increase it is, on the debt side, the increase is about 1.4%. So it's much milder on this side, because we made we made a conservative assumption, and the CPI actually came in right around that assumption. Is there another slide, Mary Lynn, or is
Yes,
this?
we have a few more questions.
Oh, I think I already answered
We
these.
already
I
covered all
apologize.
these probably.
Yes.
I don't know
Yeah.
if we did this one head on.
Yeah, I did not do this one.
Okay.
So, if the board doesn't approve the supplemental ordinance, what happens? That additional amount above the orange line, which, this year's $19,000, you would just have to pay that from funds on hand in another fund. Now, you do have some extra funds in bond and interest, but not enough. As of your last financial statement, it was right around $6,100. It'll probably be slightly higher this year. But when you get to the next year, it compounds a little bit higher. That has to come out of pocket every time you get to the third year. But then we also don't accomplish the objective of what we're trying to do, is make it a less of an increase when we get to the time to do the next bond series. Is there another question, Mary Lynn, or is that
No,
the last one?
all we have
Okay.
then really is to just show what the ordinance would look like. This would be coming to the board in December with the property tax levy. We would do these side by side or one right after the other, asking for you to approve this, and then they all get filed with the county then. But we should go around and ask if there are any questions.
Let me just ask one, I think, pretty simple question. The net effect of the supplemental property tax levy is to collect an additional $19,000 from our taxpayers. Total $19,000, which is perhaps $1 addition to the tax bill on the mythical house that we had.
Yeah, we were actually, and I don't know why we did this one sort of by person. It would be less than $1 per resident. But yeah, so maybe a couple dollars a house.
Yeah, and it's too bad that Truth in Taxation doesn't incorporate the changes in the bond levy, because that would have brought your overall levy increase well below 5%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that was my only question. So we'll start with Terry.
No questions.
Jen.
None from me, thanks.
Cal, are you able to ask a question? Or
Yeah, the only question I had with regard to this, and I talked to Brian earlier today, is there any expense involved that we need to incur in order to do this, floating these bonds or whatever we're doing here?
No, there's no expense in doing this. This is part of the continuing service. Chapman and Cutler prepared the ordinance, and they did that as part of their service in connection with the original financing.
Okay, so we're not spending any money to seek $19,000.
Nope.
Okay, that's all. That's my only question.
all right, good. I think we understand this, and we thank you for the presentation.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to go over to a different presentation now. Are we good to move on to our next agenda item?
Such as the General Obligation Limited Tax Debt Certificate Series 2021.
Yes. Okay, let me just get that here. Okay, whoops, sorry. Okay, so are you seeing the refunding opportunity, new money analysis and such on your screen?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And we're gonna start off with Bob on this one as well.
You want to put it in presentation mode, Mary Lynn?
Oh, yes, I can. Sorry about that. There you go. Okay.
I'll go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start while
Okay.
you're doing that. Just as a reminder, this financing has two different purposes at the high level. It's got a refinancing purpose, which is refinancing the 12 and 13 debt certificates. And those debt certificates are callable here on December 15th. So we're within 90 days of the call date, which is required to do that on a tax exempt basis. And we are amortizing those payments a bit differently to accommodate the addition of the $17 million to keep overall most of the payment the same for the $15 million component and for the refunding component, which can be seen on the next slide here. Do you want to go ahead and advance, Mary Lynn?
Do you see that or no?
No.
No.
Really?
I think what happened, this is what always happens with PowerPoint, is it flips the presentation mode to a different screen.
Okay, hold on.
And then we were still seeing your PowerPoint file. So as you were advancing, we
Oh,
weren't seeing
really?
anything.
Okay. All right, let's.
It's annoying. That's what PowerPoint does.
We'll make a note to Microsoft.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, do you see it now?
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect.
So here's the slide. I know this is the slide we had before. It's a little different though, and we reformat it to fit, I think, a better characterization of what the board wanted to see. So the first column there is the current payments on your debt certificates. The next column represents the payments on the portion of the new debt certificates in connection with the refinancing of the 12 and 13s, in addition to the $15 million portion of the project. And then the next column there is the debt service in connection with the $2 million Park Avenue project. And then in the aggregate, you get the total debt service of all the purposes that is slightly higher. It's about it's about $118,000 higher than what you're currently paying. Now, the hope is that additional payment will be covered by the revenues that you plan to get for the Park Avenue project. But in the event that those revenues don't materialize, the district will have to pay that entire amount from its operating funds. And then when you get to 2030, there is a built-in decline in the overall payment to about $1.1 million. And that delta there between those 2 years is about $590,000. And taking $590,000 over 20 years, assuming a rate of 2.5%, would mean that the district at that time would be able to do another $9.1 million. And then we sort of be on this rolling 10-year schedule, where every 10 years would be a drop off then for a future park board to have the opportunity to do another project payable from this revenue source. And then at the bottom, you can see the combined uses of funds: $17 million for projects, about $5.5 million for refunding the principal, for total net proceeds of around $22.5 million. That was, and this analysis was based off our estimate of interest rates on September 29th. We do, subject to the board approving the ordinance next week, we do plan to take bids next week in a competitive sale where multiple underwriters will have opportunities to submit bid. And at that time, the actual rate will be determined. We did present to Moody's earlier this week on October 19th. The administration did a terrific job presenting the credit of the district, presented information on the economy, finances, debt, policies, practices, procedures, your various plans that you've put together. Moody's is releasing the rating tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Given the feedback on that rating call, we're not anticipating any change in the AAA rating. And given how well the district has done since the last time we went to Moody's for a rating, which was late 19 or early 20. The board would adopt the resolution on the 25th, and we're planning to sell on the 27th, next Wednesday would be the sale date, and the closing date would be December 1st. That's when the funds will be set aside to pay off the old certificates on December 15th, and you would receive the $17 million for projects.
Okay. All
Any-
right.
Any additional questions?
Let's start with Jen on this one.
None from me, thank you.
Terry?
I just noticed that you were saying this kind of 10-year rolling ability to create new bonds for new projects. Is that pretty standard in the Park District biz?
It can be standard with, some park districts. I would say it's more common across all types of units of government. The alternative is you could have borrowed more funds today and kept the payment at $1,678,000 for 20 years. But if you did that, you'd have to have an expectation to spend that over the next 3 years, which probably you would not be able to. And secondly, it really ties the hands of future boards for an extended period of time who are going to have other capital projects that are going to be prioritized. So, different park districts I'm trying to think of the ones I work with. It depends on the relative size of their DSEB, how strong their operations are. Some park districts can't afford to pay obligations back out of their operating funds like you can. So I wouldn't say it's standard like every park district does it, but there's a fair percentage of them that do.
Yeah, I didn't mean that to be an indictment on anything. I just,
Sure. I didn't take it that way.
Okay, good. All right, fine. So this looks like a very healthy plan for us, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Calvin?
No, I don't have any questions. Thanks, Bob.
You're welcome.
Nor do I, Bob. Thank you. Is there anything further that we need to discuss then, Mary Lynn, on the general obligation certificates?
So we have a couple of follow-ups based on questions from last time. We were asked to extend our draft 10-year funding model out to 11 years. And so we did that. We added this 11th year in. I think the request was we want to see that $9.1 million bond issuance that Bob was just discussing. And what would that do for us? And so basically, when we add that to our funds at the end of, this is off, at the end of 2031, we would be at about $11.1 million in our capital fund. And then the other question, or one of the other questions from last time, is what would happen if that money related to Park Avenue didn't come through? And so we know that we anticipate having money transferring over from Park Avenue starting in 2022. But if none came in, then simply we would have to reduce our current $2 million that we usually transfer to the recreation fund and reduce that transfer to the $1.8 million that you see. And then you see that year after year. We went worst case scenario on this, just assuming that not a penny ever came over from the Park Avenue project. And so what that would do to us at the end of 10 years, we would still be a positive for those tiers 1 through 5. And then again, that bond issuance of the 9.1 would come into that 11th year. We would still be okay too. So while we would have less money in the capital projects fund, it would not sideline us from those tier 1 through 5 projects that we're already planning on taking care of. We also had another question last time regarding capital projects fund balances in other park districts. We reached out to about 40 other surrounding park districts to see what they do in their capital projects fund. And every single one came back that they have no specific target established for this fund. So unlike our tax cap funds where we have that 25% reserve policy, special recreation, we have a 15% reserve policy. No one has a reserve policy for the capital fund. And I think that's all we have in this presentation.
And just noting what you see there is, this is our policy.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is our actual current policy. Sorry. Thank you, Brian.
This is in our policy manual, our fund balance policy. So the highlights are the key parts. If you want.
Right. Right.
I think the bottom line from your research is that our policy is very consistent with other park districts.
It absolutely is. Yes, it is. And actually, I am reminded here, we have one more slide. It's not pretty. Someone had asked to see, yeah, what our unfunded tier 6 projects were. I am not sure if that is still something that we wanted to look at, but this is how it's looking there. It's our $21 million of tier 6 projects. And we did put that together in case anyone wanted to look at it. And more, we pulled it out of the main 5-year plan and put it here.
There's a lot on this to go through.
There is, yeah.
And we anticipate that when we approach 2022 is when we will really begin the discussion around these and relook at, does something need to shift into a tier 5 or a tier 4 or something like that. And this is just where we're at today. So not recommending or anticipating any changes between now and when we approve the budget. It starts in 2023, so there's nothing budgeted for 2022, obviously. That's unfunded.
Are there any questions about this? Jen?
None for me.
Terry?
No.
Cal?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, there was one thing that I just wanted to go back. My reading is that right here, the differential in 2031, if there was no almost $200,000 a year derived from Park Avenue, would be about $1.5 million of a difference of the ending balance.
Right, yeah, because you're at about 10 million here, and then it's about $1 million.
About $1 million. My math was off.
That's okay.
But of course, if we didn't have the exact allocation funding from Park Avenue, there are other fundings that come in, and so this is just taking a stab at saying everything remains basically static, and we just don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. I just wanted to make that one observation. So it's about $1 million, as you said.
Okay.
All right. Is there anything else, Mary Lynn?
So just so you know, under other business is when we were going to look at the ordinance for next week for this. And I'm almost thinking, well, maybe we should have done it now, but either way, we do have a partner from Chapman and Cutler with us, Mr. Kelly Koss, and we could go to that now, or we can do our capital plan project updates first and then come back to that under other business.
No, I think that's a good point. Let's do that now. And then Kelly and Bob would be able to spend the rest of the afternoon playing golf or something.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. All right. Let me back out of here.
Our course is open, isn't it, Brian?
It is.
Yeah.
I'm going to freeze and play Saturday.
Of course, it is going to be dark in about an hour, so it wouldn't help with that.
Yeah, that's true. They're going to have to get over there quick. Okay. Let me pull this up now. Okay. All right. So we should be seeing, if I did that right, the the ordinance, well, I guess that's not the ordinance, but the ordinance here for the debt, are you seeing that on your screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay, and so a few questions came in today regarding this document. And so Kelly he is the author of this document, and we tried to get to attempt to make some changes. So we did change this to have remote verbiage in here. This was one of the concerns that came in from the commissioners. We do have a couple of deeper questions though that we wanted to hit on. So when we look in the ordinance on page 1, there was a question regarding that this is not exactly wholly accurate, because we talk about having a plan, already having a plan that has been approved by the district for the spending of the money. And so, Kelly, I didn't know if you wanted to address that, if that is a concern on your end, or should it be a concern on our end, or if this is just more of standard verbiage of what goes into these.
Sure, happy to talk about that or anything else. So just backing up, the Park District has the ability to borrow for debt certificates for any park project. And Mary Lynn, your cursor just to the left, or that language there is specifically from the park code. That is the most expansive language when you're borrowing for a project. So on a continuum, when you do a debt certificate, you can have on the continuum a lot of flexibility, which is this project, all the way to a specific, we're doing a rec center that is 30,000 square feet on this property with this parking lot. So it really is up to the board, as opposed to a voted bond where you have to have the specific project in front of the voters. Debt certificates you do not have to have. I understand the main project are the renovations and improvements at the West Ridge Park, and then the Park Avenue boating improvements. You could put those as the projects, and that would be fine. So that's one question. So right now, it's the most flexibility for the Park District. And once these debt certificates are issued, the contracts that will be let for those projects will have to come back to the park board to approve those contracts. So this isn't obviously the last time that the park board will see these projects. So that's number one.
Well, can I
And then-
interrupt? Can I interrupt? I was one of the authors of the questions.
Sure.
My question is, this talks about, I look at the word heretofore approved. And we
Yes.
haven't approved expenditures.
Well, it's not, and we can definitely wordsmith that, Barney, but it's the preliminary plans and estimates. So it's not obviously plans and specs. It's the park board has up to this point been discussing those two major projects. So that's what that is. Now, whether they've been approved, or I would not have any problem changing approved to considered, Barney.
That I think would be better.
Yes, fine.
Yeah.
And then if something's on file with the Office of the Secretary, I mean, the green print obviously was a master plan. These two projects, are they part of that?
They are,
Yes and no.
yeah, I mean, they are in spirit aligned with the Green Print Master Plan. Of course, they were actually more specifically part of the Green Print update that we did do 2 years ago. So the answer would be,
Yeah, on the 19th. So that, right, this isn't coming out of left field. Obviously, the park board has talked about this for a lot. So I have no problem changing that to considered. That is fine.
That's good. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, all right. Also on this page, the fourth paragraph, we had questions, Kelly, regarding the installment purchase provisions. And we're just asking if there is more clarification on what exactly is this paragraph trying to convey?
Sure. Back in the old days, there was not the ability to borrow by issuing debt certificates. What park districts did were they would actually enter into contracts with contractors and then do an installment contract to pay that contractor over a period of time. And then they would assign that to a bank to get the money up front to pay the contractor. And in the 90s, the Debt Reform Act was changed to say park districts could buy any real or personal property, and then you could enter into an agreement to pay that by an installment over a period of time. What debt certificates evidence that obligation under the agreement, but instead of having to go out, so when you do this project, you might have one general, or you might have 30 different contracts for the renovations and everything. So here, the legal nicety is that the park district can enter into an agreement with itself and the treasurer. And that is the legal underpinnings in which you then can evidence debt, issue the debt certificates. So that's what that's talking about. And then I think after somebody had a question, that actual agreement is, the form of that is after page 5. So that's why this ordinance has page numbers, and then right there, Mary Lynn,
Yeah.
that's the installment purchase agreement. So by entering into that, every time you execute a contract for the project, whether it's one general or specific, then you identify that future contract to this agreement, and that allows the park district to spend the debt certificate proceeds that you'll get at closing on the project.
Well,
So,
that raises a question then.
sure.
Are we now identifying, going back to page 1 and continuing the projects that we're going to spend this money on with specificity?
No, that's why the project is very flexible of what the project is. And then when you actually do the construction or the renovation, the actual construction contract will be identified to the agreement. So theoretically, not theoretically, you went out to the market, you're telling your investors you're doing those two major projects. If the park board were to decide to do something else, they could do that, but obviously the park board itself would have to make that determination.
Oh, no, okay, see, this is where I'm a little confused, and pardon me for playing lawyer to everyone's boredom here. We keep talking about the two projects. And I don't know that we're necessarily locking in the $17 million to Park Avenue or to Westridge, because there's other things, aren't there, Mary Lynn, that you're going to use this money for? Or do we, and I'm sorry, or do we now have to? I guess my question is, if we decide to redo the recreation center locker rooms and we want to use the money from this is a pool of money, can we do that?
From a legal standpoint, yes, you can, because the project description is very, very broad.
So it's basically anything we want to do in the district.
Correct. Any park project, correct.
Okay, so now administratively, we now go to the page 5, I think it was. I'm sorry to bore everybody. So Mary Lynn has to administer this installment purchase agreement in conjunction with spending money for Westridge, Park Avenue, Recreation Center, new lights at a ballpark.
That is correct. But what typically happens is you do invoices and the finance committee, and then probably in an omnibus fashion, the park board approves spending on specific contracts.
Mm-hmm.
So when the first for either, you can do it either one or two ways. When you enter into the contract, you can identify it to the agreement, or when you're making your first payment, you can identify it to the agreement. I will draft, in fact, it reminded me to do that. I just wrote contract ordinance. So, and I'll go through that with Mary Lynn, because I think Mary Lynn wasn't there the last time, obviously, when you did your debt certificates, but I remember coming up and talking with your former finance person. So we can do it one of two ways, kind of bundle them all up and then identify them. And then once they're identified, then you just do your normal, it's just one more step, but once they're identified, then you just do your normal payouts as you
Okay.
would.
Okay. And this is just, this is to keep track of where the money is going, and upon an audit, be able to connect this installment purchase agreement to the money, to the project, to the expenditures.
Exactly right.
Okay, thank you. See, I'm catching it. I'm getting on to this.
Yeah, I did one up in Vernon Hills back in the 80s before we had this. And I had to deal with 22 contractors, and you couldn't do the borrowing until you actually had let the contracts. So this allows you to do the borrowing up front and then to identify the projects later.
Oh, that's great. And here I was going to offer you the job as project manager, but okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, and then I believe our last question that I received has to do with this conveyance, this number 2 on page B. We're just looking for more clarification on what exactly does that mean?
That goes back to the legal underpinnings of this is the Park District is executing this agreement with the treasurer, and the treasurer is actually selling the project as it is constructed. So all this says is, and it's probably easier if we went back to individual installment contracts. So if you had someone who was doing repaving of the parking lot, then at some point when they did that work, they would do the work, and then it would become the owner of that improved parking lot. The actual cement and labor would be the Park District. And so all this is saying, as each of those pieces of the project get done, the agreement says that then they become the Park Districts. That's what that is.
So the first sentence, the district conveys to the seller any portion of the project you're required by the district, and then they convey it back. Is that what
Correct.
that's saying?
Correct.
Okay, it's your world, not mine. So it's basically the same thing as a contractor's lien.
Yeah, it gets around. What this does also is, in the old time, and you would understand this, you would have to worry about bankruptcy of your contractor. Here, the contractor, you don't have to worry about that. So
Okay, fine. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Okay. All right, that's all the questions I received from commissioners, but I didn't know if anybody else had any other questions for Kelly while he's.
Yeah, Marilyn, could you scroll down to Exhibit F?
Sure.
I don't think there's an exhibit. Is it a page?
Well, it's page
Well, I'm
F.
sorry, I meant to say page F,
Yes.
then comes a certificate, and then go to the next page. This is then labeled page 6, I think.
Right, and we
Like this-
leave off, oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
this picks back up in the ordinance. So
Right.
instead of having that agreement as an exhibit, we put it right into the ordinance.
Okay, I got it. Okay. Thank you. Now it all makes sense.
Yeah.
I was wondering, did we miss something here? All right, I don't have any other questions. I know these were nitpicky and everyone else fell asleep, so.
No, there's-
Jen, do you have any questions? Terry?
No questions.
I put everybody to sleep.
that-
Cal?
That's my job.
I'm sorry, I was here sleeping, so I really wasn't paying attention. I apologize.
Wait,
I did promise Barney that I would take a look at this 45-page document, and I haven't had a chance to do it. So subject to any other questions I may have, Kelly, I'll try to get to you as soon as I can. I'm sorry. I just couldn't get it done for this meeting. But I assume Barney asked every question that I would have asked. So
I did have a question. Did I hear him call Barney old? I thought I heard that.
Terry, unfortunately, my camera's not on, so you can't see me in my current state. Yes, I'm already ready for Halloween. Kelly, thank you very much. Marilyn, do we have anything else on
My
this that we
pleasure.
need to do?
No, we're ready to move on to the next agenda item, if you are.
Thanks, Kelly.
Okay.
Thanks, Bob. We appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Kelly.
Kelly. Thank you, Bob.
You're welcome.
We actually, I think, now understand this to a degree that certainly I did not have before, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay.
Capital projects, capital plan project updates, Director Voss to present 2021 park tree removals bid.
Good afternoon. Let me share my screen here. Oop, hold on one moment. All right, so recently we put out the 2021 Parks tree removal bid. The bid opening was actually just this morning. This included 34 trees at 8 sites. Now, the Parks Department does do plenty of its own tree removals throughout the year, but these trees are focused on either very difficult access or climbing, or quite frankly, some of the sizes too. Many of these are more than 20-inch, 30-inch in diameter. So while the parks crew has the ability to do them, quite frankly, they're going to take a lot longer than it will be just to go the contractor route, as they have much more experience as they do this on a daily basis. So the 8 parks, as you can see listed there, the 34 trees are spread throughout. We did have 5 responsive bidders this morning, and Robert Kanukin, Tree Experts out of Lake Bluff, was our low bidder at $31,700. But I also wanted to go over the capital we have. So this year, we only put 30,000 in the original capital budget for 2021. The last about 5 or 6 years, we were at 50,000. We lowered that this year, thinking it would be less. As you can see, we've already had a little bit of activity earlier this year at Heller and Mooney. Those projects were 8,000. I got to move the pictures here because I covered in the numbers. All right, 8,200. And the low responsive bidder with Kanukin would be 31,700. So this would be above the capital budget that we currently have. But if we chose not to, we would just be doing them next year. So we still have to get these done, as they are dead trees, and some of them are hazardous. One of them is over the Stubby Cabin over at Laurel by City Hall. So we would like to proceed and accomplish this fall instead of delaying some for next year. So at the October 26th board meeting next Tuesday, staff would recommend approval from the park board for the park district to go under contract with Canuck and Tree Experts in the amount of $31,700 to remove these trees. Any questions I can answer?
I certainly have none. Cal,
Questions?
Terry,
No.
Jen?
Nope.
All right. I think you would put this on the consent agenda then.
Thank you all.
Now, recreation spin bike sole source purchase. Who's going to present this?
Good evening.
Hello.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, nicely.
Okay,
You're
wonderful.
one of the air traffic controllers also.
Yes, I am. This is my third grade son's whatever headgear that he wears in school. So I had to borrow it because I think I can think better instead of hearing the echoes all over my office. So I'm really excited to be here tonight and share with you what we would like to request from the board. So I will try to share my screen. I haven't done this. Oh, share screen. Here we go. Let's see. Share. Okay. Can you guys see this PowerPoint? Oh, that's good. Okay. Let me see slideshow. Okay, so if everyone can see, in 2020, Jody DiTomaso did an amazing job presenting the need for new spin bikes that would also have supportive, interactive, and metric-based software. So this was back in March of 2020. And right before that, or right after that presentation, life changed as we know it. And staff did respond to this pandemic by offering outdoor group fitness classes that were enjoyed by many participants. And this did include our spin classes. The bikes were in need of a replacement in 2020 due to the age of the bikes, the number of classes that we offered per week, and the number of riders that were using these bikes. The condition of the bikes worsened as we moved them outdoors, again, to meet the needs, the programming needs of the community. They were moved in and out of sheds, the weather elements, and continued usage. So the classes do still have great usage, 10 to 12 riders per class outdoors. We are recommending the same bikes for the purchase, the Stages bikes. We are changing it slightly by requesting Peloton bikes instead of the Stages solo bike. So we would be requesting 2 commercial Peloton bikes. It's a household name, household brand. We think this would attract and retain our members. It allows multiple users to use the Peloton bikes, multiple subscriptions, just as if you travel to a hotel and you jump on a Peloton bike. It just allows that for our members and potential members. With the continued, we also would like to continue outdoor spin in 2022 if there's still a need for that. So with that, we would like to hold on to several of our bikes. So we were planning on getting rid of 33 bikes. We would like to hold on to 15. So our trade-in value would be a little less on the quote. So I do kind of have a comparison side-by-side chart here. The original quote was for 28 classroom bikes. We are now, with being more cognizant of spacing in the room, we don't want to pack that room with as many bikes. So we've shortened that to 21 bikes. However, the price of the spin bikes did increase by $280 since this original proposal. So it did go up a little bit. We no longer want to put the Stages solo bike on the floor. Yes, it does have all their interactive bells and whistles, but the Peloton is more of a household brand that people are familiar with, and they can jump on. And Direct Fitness distributes Peloton because Precor bought Peloton. So it's a nice all bundled package. So instead of the 33 trade-ins, we want to trade in 17, keep the 15 bikes, and you can see the different cost changes. In 2020, the cost was $57,000, and we are requesting $58,000 for these spin bikes. And just to give you a little visual of what these bikes are, they're amazing bikes. And what's unique about these particular spin bikes is that blue middle shifter in the middle of the bike. You can go to high to low or low to high super quickly without turning the knob for your resistance. These bikes also have dumbbell holders on them. And if you're an avid cyclist, they have any sort of grip that you would want. Jody included the aero bars, and it comes with the other bars that are there. So it definitely has it all. And then I'm going to show you the condition of our current bikes. So if you were a brand new rider coming to one of our classes, this is what you're going to hop on. So this first picture, the first picture is kind of where people put their water bottles. The next picture is where a participant would be adjusting the height of the handlebars. And you can see some of them are getting rusted out and really beat up and scratched up. And this is the flywheel on the back. It's pretty beat up. Some of them are uneven. The middle picture here, you can see just the wear and tear on these bikes. And we are definitely ready for new bikes. So staff is recommending that the Finance Committee provide consent to today. Whoa, whoops, getting used to this slide sharing. To purchase the new Stages bikes in amount of $58,568 through sole source provider Direct Fitness Solutions on the consent agenda for the October 26th regular board meeting. And the amount that was currently in the budget for this project is $60,000. So it's a little less. So maybe we can contribute to the trees. Anyone have any questions? And thank you.
No, thank you. It was good presentation, and the pictures, I think, says a lot about it. Let me start. I really do appreciate, having been a spin person pre-COVID, the condition of the bikes, the thought of having fewer bikes in the room, having bikes available for outdoor, having the Pelotons on the fitness floor. I think there was a lot of good thought that went into this. All I can do is say this was a good presentation. I wholeheartedly support it.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Terry?
Yeah, I mean, boy, those pictures did bring it home. I do like the fact that you adjusted it to keep it in budget. My one question just is, because I don't spin there, how has the usage been indoors for what we have going?
We've only brought them indoors a couple of times. They're moved. They were moved right under the tent. And now we have lighting out there, so they're still cycling outdoors. We've only had a handful that came in for rain, and that was before the tent was put up. So usage is still really good. We're averaging 11, 12 per class, and that's pretty consistent with our total group fitness averages. So it's right there with all of the rest of the classes on the schedule.
Yeah, then I'm 2 thumbs up as long as we're using them. So that's great.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Terry, where do you spin?
Yeah, I'm curious too.
I spin in my house, the Peloton.
Oh, okay. Jen?
No, I like it. Totally support it. The bikes are a big deal and they're really visible. And it's one of the first things people complain about when they say, oh, you don't have, your equipment's breaking down or it's old, it needs to be replaced. So I'm excited about that. And Ryan and I have done some spinning at Midtown and quit because it was not as good as the Park District. So we came back.
Well, you'll love these bikes. These bikes are fantastic, super smooth.
Cal, anything?
What was the numbers in the classes prior to COVID?
I want to say about the same. I asked Jody that in the hallway today. I would say about between 10 and 12 or 10 and 15 pre-COVID, but there was quite a few classes on the schedule. So we are obviously going to be extremely careful and responsible with how many classes we're putting on the schedule and keep close eyes on those to make sure we're not offering too many. But yeah, she did say there was quite a few, and we would be really conservative with what we would be putting out. And as interest and participation increased, we would increase the amount of classes on the schedule.
And these bikes that we're purchasing, first of all, what's the life expectancy of a bike?
Depends on usage. If you got a lot of sweaters on your bikes and a lot of attendance, 5 to 8 years, and this is year 8. These are from 2013. So we're there.
Okay, and lastly, I assume there may be a second buy if things return back to normal and we have more usage of the inside space. Number one, are you confident that these bikes will still be available, or will there be a complimentary bike available a year or two now when our numbers hopefully are back to pre-COVID?
I did text our rep. They're available within 1 to 2 weeks of the purchase order, and the Peloton bikes are 1 to 2 months out, but the Stages bikes, we could get 1 to 2 weeks within the order date.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all I have.
Yep, thank you.
Let me just kind of add on to Cal's statement. Cal, I think what you're seeing is that the number of bikes in the spin room is being decreased to accommodate better atmosphere in the room. I mean, the room was pretty crowded at 28 bikes, and we needed more space. And that was one of the complaints of people when we were all spinning indoors. So I think this is a good approach.
Thank you.
So is there any objection to this going on the consent agenda? Terry, Jen, Cal?
No.
All right. We'll assume that Terry speaks for everybody. It'll go on the consent agenda then.
Wonderful. Thank you,
Good.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next item of business is, unless somebody has any other business, we will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Marilyn, you want to just confirm our next date?
I do. We have it down for Thursday, November 18th at 4 p.m.
And now we'll still entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
I
moved.
move to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We stand adjourned at 5:26 p.m. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Everybody, thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.